Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight, we journey deep into the mist-covered forests and forgotten back roads of the Pacific Northwest, a land of towering evergreens, endless rain, and secrets that never stay buried for long. Here, 10 people crossed paths with something they could never explain. From hikers who vanished, leaving only footprints that stopped mid-trail, to tenants who uncovered horrors hiding right beneath their floors, to voices that whispered through static on midnight radio. These stories remind us that the most unsettling monsters aren't always the ones we can see. What you're about to hear isn't make-believe. These are true accounts, real people who stumbled into the kind of darkness most of us only read about. 10 disturbing stories from Washington, Oregon, and the vast, silent wilderness between, where the trees stand too close, the fog never lifts, and the truth has a way of disappearing. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Haunted Tales for nightly true horror stories that will keep you awake long after the lights go out. Tap that notification bell, and when you're ready, take a deep breath, because tonight we're heading past the last streetlight into the heart of the Pacific Northwest, where the road ends and the fear begins. Highway 2 cuts through the heart of Washington like a scar carved into the wilderness, a narrow, twisting road that winds up through Stevens Pass, connecting the small towns of Monroe, Skycomish, and Leavenworth. In daylight, it's scenic, evergreen slopes, snow-capped peaks, rivers whispering beneath the bridges. But after dark, the road changes. The fog rolls in thick from the Cascades, muting the world into shades of gray, and the forest presses close, ancient and watchful. Truckers say it's one of the loneliest stretches in the Pacific Northwest, and one of the most haunted. The legend of the vanishing hitchhiker of Highway 2 has persisted for nearly 70 years. It isn't a campfire story whispered by teens. It's documented in police reports, logging company dispatch logs, and Washington State Patrol records dating back to the early 1950s. Each account eerily similar. A lone woman, dressed in a torn white gown, appears out of nowhere along the roadside, drenched, trembling, and barefoot. She waves frantically for help. When a driver pulls over and lets her in, she gives only a name, Anna, and an address in Leavenworth. But she never makes it there. The earliest recorded sighting came from truck driver Frank Adler, dated October 17, 1952. His logbook, recovered years later by his son, notes the time and weather: dense fog, light rain, 41 degrees. He was hauling lumber east toward Wenatchee when he spotted what he thought was a person in distress, standing just past mile marker 58, near the old Cascade Tunnel entrance. He slowed down, headlights cutting through mist, and saw a young woman, pale skin, soaked hair clinging to her face, and a wedding dress stained with dirt. She was barefoot, shivering, and her lips were blue. Adler wrote that he rolled down the window and asked if she needed help. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. She said, "Please, I need to get home." He offered her a blanket and led her into the cab. She sat silently for several miles, staring out the window as the fog thickened. When Adler asked where she lived, she murmured, "Leavenworth. I just need to get back before he does." That sentence, "before he does," would later appear in multiple witness statements, always identical. A few miles later, as Adler approached the long descent toward Tumwater Canyon, he felt the air in the cab turn icy cold. His breath fogged in front of him. When he looked to his right, the seat was empty. The blanket he'd given her was folded neatly. No door had opened. No sound, no movement. Just the echo of the wind and the wipers dragging across glass. He stopped the truck, stepped out into the fog, and searched the shoulder with a flashlight. Nothing. Only wet gravel and the faint smell of lilac, a scent he swore lingered in the cab for days afterward. In the weeks that followed, local authorities received 3 separate calls describing a distressed woman in a wedding dress seen between Skycomish and Leavenworth. Search parties found nothing, but a month later, hikers discovered the wreckage of an old Studebaker down a steep ravine near mile marker 60, half buried in moss and ferns. Inside were the remains of a man and woman. The woman's left hand still wore a wedding ring. Local papers reported it as an accident. Newlyweds lost in mountain storm. Their names were Anna and Michael Davenport, married just 3 days before their car plunged off the mountain road in 1947. Anna's body, however, was never recovered. Over the next decades, the sightings continued, dozens of them. Truckers, police officers, even tourists claimed to have seen her. Some offered rides, others swerved in fear. A few were never the same again. One of the most chilling accounts came from Washington State Patrol officer Neil Garrison, who spoke anonymously in a 1993 radio interview. He'd been patrolling near Stevens Pass when dispatch received a call about a possible pedestrian in distress. Garrison arrived within minutes and spotted a figure standing by the guardrail. Long white dress, head bowed. He pulled over, radioed in, and approached with his flashlight. When the beam hit her face, she looked up, eyes empty, her skin pale and translucent like frost. Garrison took a step back, hand hovering near his holster, unsure if he was dealing with a real person or a hallucination. The woman whispered, "I have to get home." Before he could respond, a passing semi-truck blasted its horn, momentarily blinding him in the headlights. When the light passed, she was gone. He scoured the area for 20 minutes. No footprints, no sign of anyone walking away. The radio crackled with static. Then faintly, he heard a woman's voice whisper through the frequency, "Please." Before he does, truckers still talk about her in the diners along Highway 2, especially in the small town of Skycomish, where drivers gather before tackling the pass. They speak quietly, glancing toward the rain-streaked windows, like saying her name too loudly might summon her. One man, Don Keller, claimed he picked her up in 2007. He described her as almost solid, but not quite there, like the fog shaped itself into a woman. She never looked at him directly, only stared ahead, murmuring something about needing to get home. When he asked who she was running from, she said he never stopped. Then she looked at him, her eyes completely black. The truck's engine stalled. When Keller turned to grab his flashlight, she was gone, leaving the seat wet, as though she just stepped out of the... Rain Keller quit long-haul driving 2 months later. Skeptics argue that the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker is common, found in dozens of regions across America, and that Highway 2's story is just a localized version. But locals insist there's something unique about Stevens Pass. The weather changes violently, storms rolling in without warning. Dense fog can appear in seconds. And near mile marker 58, the exact place where Anna's Studebaker was found, electronics often fail. Radios flicker with static, headlights dim, and cell signals die completely. Hikers report hearing a woman sobbing in the forest during rainstorms. Some smell lilacs even in winter. A few claim to have seen a white figure standing near the drop-off, motionless, as if waiting for a ride that never comes. In 2018, a group of paranormal investigators from Seattle tried to document the phenomenon. They set up thermal cameras and audio recorders along the stretch of road where most sightings occurred. Around 2:15 a.m., one of the cameras captured a faint heat signature moving along the shoulder, a shape roughly human in size but cold compared to the surrounding air. A minute later, the camera lens fogged over. The audio recorder picked up something else, a voice barely audible over the hiss of static. When filtered, the words became clear. "Please, I need to get home." The recording remains one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence linked to the case. And though skeptics have tried to debunk it, the team maintains that no one else was on the road that night. Even today, Washington State Patrol officers receive occasional 911 calls reporting a woman in white walking near the pass, usually during heavy rain or fog. By the time responders arrive, she's gone. Some callers insist they saw her standing in the middle of the road staring at their headlights. One motorist claimed she appeared inside his car for a split second, seated in the back seat, dripping water, whispering his name. He'd never heard the legend before. When asked to describe her scent, he said, "Lilacs and cold air." No one can explain why she appears, whether she's searching for her lost husband, replaying the night of the crash, or warning others not to suffer the same fate. Some believe she's trapped in a loop of grief and guilt, bound to that stretch of road until someone finally takes her home. But those who've seen her say the same thing. She doesn't want help. She wants to be found. If you ever find yourself driving Highway 2 through Stevens Pass on a stormy night, keep your eyes on the road ahead. The fog can swallow your headlights, the trees seem to shift, and the silence feels wrong. And if you see a lone woman in a white dress waving by the roadside, think twice before stopping, because some passengers never leave the truck. In the small town of Index, population barely over 100, there's a diner that stays open through the night for truckers caught in the mountain weather. The waitress there, Marla Jensen, 68 years old, has served coffee to drivers for nearly 4 decades. She's heard every version of the hitchhiker story, but one night in 2014, she saw something herself. It was just past 1 a.m. when a man came in, drenched to the bone. He looked pale, shaking, and refused to sit with his back to the window. The Snoqualmie Pass, carved high through the Central Cascades, is the main artery linking the quiet pine towns east of the mountains to Seattle's glowing skyline. By day, it's beautiful. Alpine slopes glittering with snowmelt, rivers slicing through basalt cliffs. But after nightfall, when the fog drifts low and the peaks disappear into blackness, that same road feels ancient and predatory. And in that darkness, lights begin to move. They don't belong to any vehicle. They appear where no road should be, hovering between trees, pulsing above ravines, gliding silently across lanes before vanishing into mist. Drivers call them the phantom lights of Snoqualmie Pass, and for nearly a century, no one has explained what they are. Echoes from the avalanche. The first recorded mention comes from 1910, the year of the Wellington Avalanche, still one of America's deadliest. A passenger train and a mail car were buried under tons of snow just west of the modern pass. 96 people died. Locals claimed that in the weeks afterward, strange fires were seen on the ridgeline, bluish orbs that drifted above the wreck site, vanishing whenever anyone approached. Miners said it was the souls of the trapped, their lanterns searching for a way out of the snow. When engineers later blasted the new highway through the same mountains, workers started filing their own reports. One foreman wrote in his 1934 log, "Unexplained lights moving uphill against the storm. No sound. Crew refuses night shift." The entry was stamped, "Weather phenomenon unconfirmed and buried in the archives." The truckers' encounter in 1978. Long-haul driver Ray McKinley was hauling apples east when his CB crackled with static near mile 54. The mountain fog was so dense his high beams hit a wall of white. Then, through the mist, he saw 2 pinpoint lights ahead, bright, perfectly round, bobbing side by side like the taillights of a car. He slowed, waiting for the curve to clear. The lights drifted upward, rising above the guardrail, then crossed the road at windshield height and hovered in front of his rig. "Couldn't have been headlights," he told state investigators later. "They were too small, too clean, and they moved like something alive." Ray hit the brakes, heart hammering. The lights pulsed once, and the cab went dark. Every electrical gauge died, the engine silent. When they flared again, they weren't white anymore, but deep blue, spinning slowly like twin stars caught in orbit. Then they shot straight up into the fog and disappeared. The truck's power returned a moment later. His log clock had lost exactly 6 minutes, the scientist's failure in 1999. University of Washington researchers installed magnetic sensors along a 5-mile stretch to study recurring interference blamed for highway radio dropouts. The readings were erratic, spikes of electromagnetic energy with no lightning, no solar activity, no cause. Each spike coincided with at least one 911 call describing floating lights, or headlamps that vanish. At 2:47 a.m. on October 6th, the lead scientist, Dr. Elaine Cho, witnessed them herself. She described 2 luminous spheres drifting parallel to the road, perfectly silent, illuminating the snow around them, as if the light had weight. When she raised her camera, the viewfinder went black. The footage recovered later showed only a few seconds. The dashboard clock frozen at 2:47 a.m. Then a whisper across the audio track, a single word that sounded like "below." The team never returned to finish the study. Funding was redirected. Voices in the missed state patrol logs contained scattered notes through the 1980s and 1990s. Caller reports, "Blue fire on ridge." Possible flare, negative confirmation. Driver claims lights followed vehicle for 3 miles. One report stands out. March 12, 1988. Officer Rick Delaney pulled over a frightened family near the summit. They'd seen lanterns floating across the road in single file. The father insisted he heard voices through the open window, distant, overlapping, like a crowd chanting underwater. His daughter drew pictures of people made of light, walking but not touching the ground. Delaney searched the shoulder and found nothing. Yet when he returned to his cruiser, every bulb in his light bar had burnt out simultaneously. Local legends and the miners' curse old-timers in nearby North Bend tell an older story, that long before the railway and the highway, prospectors vanished here chasing ghost fires that appeared after storms. They called them corpse candles. When miners followed them into ravines, they never came out. Some tribes of the region warned that the lights marked the territory of Tukwila, spirits of those who died in snow without proper burial. They were said to lure the living with warmth, only to steal their breath so they could walk again. Anthropologists dismissed it as folklore. Yet hikers still report sudden warm patches of air in sub-zero blizzards, accompanied by the faint smell of burning pine, though no fire burns nearby. A modern account on a winter night in 2017, tech worker Alyssa Gomez was driving home to Ellensburg after a late shift in Seattle. Her dashcam recorded most of what happened. The footage begins with heavy snow and low music on the radio. At 1:13 a.m., interference drowns the signal. Seconds later, two lights appear ahead, weaving slowly across the median. Alyssa murmurs, "What is that?" The orbs hover, merge into one brilliant flare, and the cabin floods with blue light. The camera freezes. Audio cuts out. She woke parked sideways across both lanes, engine idling. It was 2:04 a.m. The dashcam had lost 51 minutes of footage. On the passenger seat lay a handful of soot, smelling faintly of ozone. Her doctor later confirmed mild retinal burns consistent with staring directly at welding arcs. She never drove the pass again. Unsettling patterns. State's accident database shows a curious rhythm. A spike in single vehicle crashes every February and October, coinciding with high mountain fog. Survivors often claim they swerve to avoid bright blue lights. Weather balloons, drones, and atmospheric reflections have all been proposed. None match the descriptions or trajectories. No debris, no signatures on radar. Even Department of Transportation cameras sometimes flicker with static at the same mile markers where the lights appear. In several archived feeds, a faint glow crosses the screen, trailing a shadow shaped like a human figure. The sound beneath the silence. Those who've encountered the lights describe not just what they saw, but what they felt. The moment they appeared, all sound vanished. The engine, the wind, even the heartbeat in their ears. Then came a low vibration, almost a note, resonating in the chest rather than the ears. Scientists call it infrasound, a frequency that can induce fear and disorientation. Locals think it's something else, the mountain itself remembering. A retired snowplow driver, Carl Morrison, once said, "It's like the lights aren't coming at you, they're coming through you. You feel them before you see them." He kept a crucifix taped to his dashboard for 30 years. The climber's discovery in 2009. Two climbers descending from nearby Guy Peak noticed flickering deep inside a snow cave left by an avalanche. They crawled in, thinking it was a lost headlamp. Instead, they found a metal lantern, blackened but still faintly warm. Inside was a fused glass lens that emitted a weak, cold glow even in darkness. When they carried it down, the light went out. The Washington State Museum cataloged it as Artifact Nutter SP-192, Unknown Luminescent Residue. Within weeks, the object was stolen. Surveillance cameras captured nothing, just a brief flare of blue light in the storage hall at 2:47 a.m., the same timestamp as Dr. Cho's missing footage. What the patrol still sees, ask any veteran trooper who works the pass at night, and they'll admit it quietly. Everyone's seen the lights at least once. Sometimes they appear far ahead, cresting the next hill like motorcycle lamps. Sometimes they hover over the median, indifferent to oncoming traffic. And sometimes they drift right through the windshield, leaving frost patterns shaped like fingerprints. One rookie officer described pulling over when he saw a flare in the snowfield. "I thought someone had crashed," he said. "But when I stepped out, it lifted off the ground, maybe 10 feet high, and I could see shapes inside it, like faces pressed against glass." He blinked, and the light exploded outward without a sound. His radio never worked again. Theories and denials, government explanations have ranged from ball lightning to ionized snow crystals. Along the Oregon coast, Highway 101 slithers between the dark Pacific and towering cliffs that drop hundreds of feet to the crashing surf below. By day, it's a breathtaking drive. All sea mist, rugged pines, and gulls wheeling over the horizon. But when night falls, the same beauty twists into something uneasy. The fog creeps in thick and wet, swallowing the road until headlights glow like ghostly lanterns. Locals call this stretch between Tillamook and Cannon Beach the Drowned Mile. It's not an official name. It came from a legend, one that began in the early 1930s, when the sea took a fisherman named Henry Hank Laird and never gave him back. Hank was a lifelong resident of Tillamook Bay, the kind of man who knew the tides better than the town clock. He lived in a small clapboard house near the docks with his wife, Martha, and their 2 sons. One night in November 1933, a brutal storm rolled in from the Pacific. Black clouds, roaring wind, waves taller than houses. Reports say a trawler had gone missing near Cape Meares, and Hank, stubborn and brave, took his small boat out into the teeth of the storm to search for survivors. He never came back. The Coast Guard found splinters of his boat a week later, tangled in kelp off Nehalem. Spit. Locals held a memorial on the beach, but Martha refused to believe he was gone. For years, she was seen walking Highway 101, lantern in hand, calling his name into the wind. Drivers would pull over, thinking she'd been in an accident, only for her to vanish into the fog. Some said she lost her mind. Others swore she'd joined him, drowned herself to end the waiting. The first reports of the spectral man came in 1954. A trucker named Earl Jennings, driving a lumber rig south toward Tillamook, called state police just after midnight. He claimed he'd seen a man standing in the middle of the road, soaked head to toe, like he'd crawled out of the ocean. Earl slammed on the brakes, swerving hard enough to jackknife the trailer, but when he jumped out, no one was there. Only a puddle in the exact center of the road, salt water dripping from the fog-drenched air. Since then, the sightings have never stopped. Highway patrol logs list dozens of near collisions along that same bend near the Three Capes scenic route. Witnesses all describe the same figure, a man in fisherman's gear, drenched and pale, holding what looks like a broken lantern. He steps into the headlights, raises a hand as if to wave down help, then disappears. One 1981 report stands out. A couple from Portland, Michael and Teresa Green, were driving north toward Cannon Beach after visiting family. It was a stormy night, sheets of rain hammering the windshield. They said they saw a man standing beside the road, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, rain slicker flapping in the wind. Teresa insisted they stop. The man looked hurt. Michael pulled over, hazard lights blinking through the fog. But as he opened his door, a wave of freezing air hit him, and the passenger side window fogged over in a perfect circle, as if someone had exhaled from outside. Teresa screamed. The man was gone. When they drove off, their car radio flickered, catching a faint voice between static. "Help me find her," before the dial went dead. Old-timers in Tillamook believe Hank's spirit still roams that highway, searching for his wife. Others say it's Martha, still calling for him in the fog, mistaken for a man in the shimmer of headlights. Paranormal investigators who visited the site describe unusual readings: spikes in electromagnetic fields, sudden drops in temperature, and most unsettlingly, the sound of a woman crying carried faintly on the wind when no one is nearby. Local folklore says if you drive that stretch after midnight during a storm, you should never stop, and no matter who you see in the road, roll up your windows, keep your eyes forward, and whatever you do, don't look into your rearview mirror until you're miles away, because that's where people say he appears last, dripping, silent, and watching, the ghost of the fisherman who could never make it home. The Oregon coast is breathtaking during the day, a ribbon of asphalt threading through cliffs, sea spray, and wind-twisted pines. But after nightfall, that same beauty transforms into something hollow and haunting. Locals say the sea takes on a darker voice after midnight, whispering secrets to anyone foolish enough to listen. And along the winding stretch of Highway 101 between Tillamook and Cannon Beach, that voice doesn't just whisper, it calls. It's a section known for thick fogs that roll in without warning, covering the road so completely that even high beams can't pierce it. Travelers describe the sensation of driving through milk, that claustrophobic disorientation where the world beyond your windshield simply ceases to exist. The few who have driven it in those hours say the fog isn't just natural. It feels heavy, like it's alive, pressing against the car with intent. That's when people see him, a figure on the road, always in the same place, just beyond the curve near the cliffs that overlook Cape Lookout. Sometimes he's kneeling, sometimes standing, one arm outstretched, as if signaling for help. Witnesses describe him in detail that shouldn't be possible through fog that dense, the slick glisten of a raincoat, the sheen of seawater on his skin, the way his eyes seem hollow but shining, reflective like glass. For nearly 70 years, the people of Tillamook have argued about who, or what, the man is. The legend begins with Henry Hank Laird, the fisherman who vanished in the storm of '33. Some still believe it's his ghost, restless, caught between life and death, forever searching for his wife who refused to stop waiting. Others whisper something older inhabits that fog, wearing his form like a mask. Something drawn to the grief that soaked this coastline when Hank's boat went down. There's an old Coast Guard report from 1934 that mentions an unidentified light seen out on the water the night Hank disappeared. The light appeared several times between 2 and 4 a.m., blinking at irregular intervals, almost like Morse code. When rescuers arrived at dawn, the light was gone, and so was Hank. For years after, locals claimed to see the same light moving just offshore during storms. Fishermen called it the widow's lantern. It was said to appear only when someone was about to die at sea. Then came the modern accounts, the police logs, the dashcam footage, and the reports that investigators can't quite explain away. In 1998, a tourist named Brian Walters captured something on his camcorder that still circulates quietly among paranormal groups. He'd stopped at a turnout near Short Beach to record the storm surf, rain hammering the rocks, waves exploding against the cliffs. But on playback, just as a lightning flash illuminated the highway behind him, a human shape appeared for less than a second, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. The strange part? Brian hadn't seen anyone there in real life. He sent the tape to the Oregon State Police after hearing about similar reports, but the official reply listed it as artifacting due to low-light exposure. Yet Brian swore it was real, that he'd caught the ghost of Highway 101 on film. Locals have their own stories. A retired park ranger named Elaine Porter once spoke about a night she was driving home from Cannon Beach in 2003. It was after 2 in the morning, she said, and the fog was so thick I could barely see the yellow lines. I slowed down, and out of nowhere, a man stepped right into my lane. I screamed, slammed the brakes, and I swear to God I went through him. My car didn't hit anything, just this freezing cold rush, like plunging into ice water. I stopped on the shoulder and sat there shaking. And when I looked in the mirror, he was standing behind my car, holding something, a lantern maybe, and then he was gone. Elaine never drove that road at night again. Another pattern began to emerge, electronics dying near the fog bank. Radios flickering to static, phones draining instantly, GPS units spinning in circles. Paranormal researchers call this environmental interference, but drivers swear it happens every time someone reports seeing the figure. In 2015, a Coast Guard dispatcher named Rodrigo Menendez received a 911 call that still chills him. The caller was a young woman driving north toward Cannon Beach. Her voice trembled through static. "There's a man in the road," she said. "He's waving me down. I think he's hurt." The dispatcher told her to stay in the car and keep her distance until troopers arrived. But then she whispered something that made him freeze. "He's knocking on my window." The line went dead. Police found her car idling on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking in the fog. No one inside. No footprints leading away. Just the driver's door hanging open and a trail of wet, salty water leading across the pavement, as if something had dripped its way out of the car and vanished into the mist. Even now, residents along the coast say you can hear faint knocking on windows when the fog gets thick. Slow, deliberate, as though someone is trying to be let in. And those who've dared to stop on that stretch report one final, eerie detail. Their headlights sometimes reflect 2 sets of eyes staring back from the road. One belonging to the drowned man, the other to a woman beside him, pale and shimmering, still searching. No one knows if the legend began with Hank and Martha or if their tragedy simply fed something older, something the sea has always owned. There's a curve outside Baker City, Oregon, where the asphalt bends like a broken spine around a steep drop. The locals call it Dead Man's Curve, and they say it's cursed. A stretch of the old Oregon Trail highway, where the past refuses to stay buried. Even the road signs seem to warn you. The guardrails dented, the paint chipped from decades of wrecks. Truckers who've driven that route after midnight tell the same story. When the fog rolls down from the hills, something else drives it too. Something you can hear long before you see it. They say it starts with a low rumble, an engine that doesn't match any make or model on the road today. Then, far behind you, a glow appears through the fog. Headlights, old-fashioned, too bright, too yellow. You might glance in your mirror, heart kicking once, twice, because those lights are gaining fast, too fast, and by the time you swerve to let them pass, they're gone. No car, no driver, no sound, just empty road stretching behind you. It's a story that's been told for nearly 70 years, but the origin goes much further back, to the trail itself, when that land was little more than a rough wagon road, carved by desperation and loss. Long before the highway, before Baker City even had a name, this stretch of land was part of the Meekum Cutoff, a perilous route for settlers heading west in the 1850s. It was steep, narrow, and prone to sudden landslides after rain. Many wagons didn't make it. Graves still dot the hillside, their markers long rotted away, the names forgotten. When the modern highway was built in the 1920s, construction crews uncovered bones, dozens of them, along with the remnants of wagon wheels and shattered iron fittings. They were quietly reburied, the road paved over. But some of the men working the site reported strange occurrences during the build. One foreman, James Corcoran, wrote in his daily log, "Lights appeared last night on the hillside. Looked like lanterns moving through the trees. No one there when we checked." Weeks later, a dynamite accident killed 2 workers. The blast occurred near a sharp curve that hadn't been reinforced yet, the same curve that would later become infamous. When Corcoran returned to the site afterward, he found fresh tire marks in the mud leading up to the wrecked equipment. The problem was no one owned a vehicle that fit those tracks. The modern hauntings began in 1957. A long-haul driver named Frank Dobbins was hauling a shipment of lumber to Boise when his rig lost control on that same curve. Witnesses at a nearby diner said they heard the screech of brakes and the thunderous crash that followed. But when they reached the site, the truck was burning, overturned, cab crushed. Frank didn't make it out. Investigators found the brake lines clean-cut, but no evidence of tampering. The official report listed it as mechanical failure. Locals called it something else. Retribution. Because from that night on, people began to see Frank's truck again. Not the man, the truck. One cold February night in 1962, another trucker, Don Meyer, radioed in a panic to dispatch. "There's a rig behind me. No lights, no markings, just headlights. He's right on my bumper. I'm doing 70, he's still coming." The line cut out mid-sentence. Police found Don's truck an hour later, pulled off safely on the shoulder. He was still inside, hands gripping the wheel, engine off, eyes wide open, frozen, alive, but unable to speak. When he finally recovered days later, all he could say was, "It went through me." He claimed the phantom truck passed through his trailer like smoke. Lights blazing, horn screaming, then gone. Over the decades, reports piled up. Delivery drivers, tourists, even state troopers describing a roaring semi barreling down the grade before dissolving into the fog. In one case, a trooper named Mark Stenson chased the vehicle for nearly 3 miles before it vanished at a dead-end turnout. The smell of diesel lingered in the air, but the road was bone dry. Some locals insist it's Frank Dobbins' ghost, forever trying to make his final delivery. Others say it's older, a collective echo of every soul lost on that treacherous road since the days of the wagon trail. That the highway itself has memory, and sometimes when the temperature drops and the mist hangs low, it remembers too much. Paranormal investigators from Portland visited Dead Man's Curve in 2018. They set up EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and microphones along the guardrail. The footage shows nothing at first, just the hum of insects, the wind through trees. Then, around 2:47 a.m., a sound breaks through the static, a deep rhythmic rumble. The team described it as an engine idling somewhere nearby, yet there was no vehicle within 20 miles of their location. Seconds later, both cameras cut to black. When they recovered the equipment the next morning, they found something strange burned into one of the metal tripods. Tire tread, perfectly imprinted, but leading nowhere. If you drive that route today, there's a small roadside memorial nailed to a cedar post, a rusted hubcap and a wooden plaque carved with a single phrase, "He never stopped." Truckers say if you pass the curve around 3 a.m., you might catch a glimpse of two faint headlights winding down the hill toward you. Sometimes they blink once like a warning. Sometimes they don't disappear until you've swerved in fear, tires skidding on wet pavement, heart pounding. But those who've seen it all agree on one thing. The moment you pass that curve, the radio crackles, and a man's voice whispers through the static, "Keep your eyes on the road." Dead Man's Curve isn't marked on any official map. There's no sign that says slow down, fatal turn ahead, or accident zone. It doesn't need one. Every local in Baker County knows where it is. That half-mile bend on the old Oregon Trail highway where the earth seems to tilt wrong. GPS glitches there. Compasses spin. Even birds avoid it, veering away mid-flight as though something unseen pulses beneath the ground. By day, it's a harmless piece of road. A curve cut into the mountain, with a guardrail that creaks in the wind. But at night, when fog drips down from the pines and headlights stretch thin through the mist, it becomes something else entirely. The locals say the curve breathes. They say the mountain remembers, and if you're foolish enough to stop there, you might hear the highway's past still rumbling below the asphalt. The earliest stories come from before the pavement, from the days when oxen and wagon wheels dragged desperate families across the hills. A settler's diary found near Virtue Flat in 1860 describes a narrow turn where the ground sank as though cursed. That wagon never made it. The cliff claimed all 6 travelers. Their bodies were never recovered. When road crews later paved that exact area, they found wagon fragments fused into the soil, and beneath it, a single rusted horseshoe. Workers nailed it to a tree nearby for luck, but it didn't help, because ever since, vehicles crash on that curve more than anywhere else in the county. In the early 1970s, a mechanic named Walter Red Hanley ran a small garage just outside Baker City. He made a decent living towing wrecks from Dead Man's Curve. One night, around 3 a.m., his radio scanner went wild. Static, then a garbled voice. "Truck down!" "Flames, need assistance." Red jumped in his wrecker and raced toward the curve. But when he got there, he found no wreck, no skid marks, no fire. Just fog so thick he could barely see his own hood. He sat idling, confused, until the air grew strangely warm, like standing too close to a furnace. That's when he heard it, a horn blast from somewhere inside the fog. Long, low, mournful. Then came the roar of an engine. Not his. Headlights burst through the mist, blinding him. Red slammed his brakes, expecting impact, but the truck passed straight through him. Through the wrecker. The lights, the sound, the wind, all of it passed through, vanishing down the hill like smoke. Red said his body went cold. He tried to start his engine again, but it was dead. When daylight came, he found the asphalt beneath him covered in wet tire tracks leading up to where the phantom truck had appeared, and stopping mid-road, like it had driven straight into another world. He never towed another wreck from that curve again. By the 1980s, Dead Man's Curve had become a legend. Every small-town kid in Baker City dared their friends to drive it after midnight. Most did it once and never again. One teenager, Lisa Crowley, remembers driving that way home from a football game in '86. She and her friends had been laughing, music loud, until they saw headlights appear behind them, distant but steady. Lisa's car was the only one on the road. No other lights, no sound except the wind. But those headlights crept closer, her rearview mirror filled with yellow glare. Then, flash, they were gone. Her friends teased her, thinking it was her imagination until the car's cassette player clicked on by itself. There's a long, lonely stretch of U.S. Route 97 that runs south from Klamath Falls, Oregon, down through the borderlands and into Northern California near the small town of Weed. It's a desolate highway, bordered by forest, mountain shadows, and silence. Most travelers remember it for the endless miles without signal, where even the radio fades to white noise. But truckers, night drivers, and locals whisper about something else. They call them the children of Route 97. And if you believe the stories, they only appear when the road freezes over, when the air smells of pine and metal and the fog crawls low enough to hide the ground. The first report dates back to December 1964, during one of the worst snowstorms in the region's history. A driver named Harold "Red" Tate, a long-haul trucker delivering goods to Reading, radioed dispatch shortly after 1 a.m. His voice, calm at first, became increasingly panicked. "There's kids out here," he said. "2 of them, maybe 3. They're just standing in the snow, barefoot." Dispatch asked him to clarify. Red repeated himself, breathing hard. He described a boy and a girl, both wearing old-fashioned clothes, maybe from the 1930s or 40s. They were motionless, staring at his truck as he passed. He said he pulled over to check on them, but when he opened his door, they were gone. State police searched the area the next day, found no footprints, no signs of anyone having stood there. But what they did find left investigators speechless. A set of tiny barefoot impressions frozen into the road itself, as if something impossibly cold had pressed against the ice hard enough to burn the shape in. Red Tate never drove that route again. The sightings continued. Over the years, the story changed and grew, but the core details never did. Always at night, always in the cold. Travelers would glimpse children on the roadside, sometimes waving, sometimes playing. When cars slowed or stopped, the figures vanished, not fading into the dark, but blinking out, like light being snuffed. One winter in 1989, a schoolteacher named Evelyn Hart was driving north from Weed to visit her sister in Klamath Falls. She described seeing a group of children, maybe 5 or 6, she said, holding hands in a circle in the middle of the highway, just beyond the beam of her headlights. She slammed the brakes, tires screaming on black ice, her car spinning sideways into a snowbank. When she looked back at the road, the children were gone. But faintly through the night air, she swore she heard a lullaby, soft, melodic, and wrong. She later recalled the lyrics in her police statement. "Sleep, little traveler, the night is cold. The road will keep you, body and soul." Locals in Doris, the last small town before the California border, have their own explanation. They point to a tragedy that happened in 1947, a bus crash that killed an entire class of elementary school children returning from a Christmas play in Weed. The bus, heading north through snow, lost control on an icy curve and slid into a ravine. 18 children and 2 adults died. The wreckage was discovered the next morning, the vehicle half buried in snow, the sound of a single music box still playing in the wreckage. The official memorial stands quietly off the highway, marked by a rusting plaque and a small wooden cross covered in toy offerings, dolls, toy trucks, and plastic figurines left by passers-by who've heard the stories. But residents say something about that memorial feels off. In the years following the crash, those who left toys often returned to find them rearranged, as though small hands had moved them overnight. There's a story told by Oregon State Trooper Mike Landry, who worked the Klamath Falls sector in the 1990s. He responded to a call from a stranded driver who reported seeing a young girl on the roadside. She looked lost, the man said. Long brown hair, white dress, no coat. Landry arrived 20 minutes later. The man's car was still idling, door open, engine running. But the driver was nowhere in sight. The snow around the car was undisturbed except for one detail, a single barefoot print in the snow beside the open driver's door. Landry never found the man. By 2010, Route 97 had earned a reputation among truckers. CB radio chatter nicknamed that part of the road the playground. Some refused to drive it between midnight and dawn, claiming their radios filled with what sounded like children whispering, sometimes laughing. A recording captured by a driver named Leon Garrett that same year has become infamous among paranormal circles. He'd installed a dash camera for insurance purposes, and as he crossed the Oregon border in a snowstorm, the footage picked up faint giggling from somewhere inside his cab. His breath visible, hands gripping the wheel, he muttered, "That ain't funny." Then in the passenger side window reflection, you can clearly see the outline of a small handprint, pressed against the glass from the inside. Local historian Celia Moreland, who has studied folklore of Southern Oregon, believes the story blends grief and guilt. that the collective trauma of the 1947 tragedy left a psychic scar. "The road remembers," she said in an interview. "Each winter it replays what it took. These children were frozen in time, quite literally, and sometimes on that road, time breaks." She's not alone in thinking so. Paranormal teams have visited the crash site and nearby sections of Route 97 with thermal cameras. Their footage consistently shows cold spots shaped roughly like small human forms, 6 to 8 of them at a time, clustered near the trees. And one more pattern. When the temperature drops below 20 degrees, those cold spots appear closer to the highway itself, as if something invisible moves toward the passing lights. Modern drivers still report strange encounters, headlights flickering, radios dying, fog rolling in without warning. But the most chilling accounts come from those who stop. They all describe the same thing. When the engine quiets, and the only sound is the crunch of their boots on snow, they hear laughter. Light, innocent laughter. Then, silence. And when they return to their car, their rearview mirror fogs up from inside, as though a child had just breathed against it. Sometimes there's a single word traced into the mist, written by a finger small and trembling. Play? The locals will tell you that Route 97 holds on to things, not just the weight of the trucks that pass or the salt that bites into its asphalt, but the memories of those who never made it home. The road is old, older than its concrete layers, built on top of older paths, wagon trails, and animal crossings. Some say that's why it's cursed, that every time something dies there, the land remembers. And lately, those memories seem to be remembering back. In early 2018, a logging crew from McDowell reported hearing children playing deep in the tree line near the old crash site. It was mid-February, temperatures below freezing, and their chainsaws were off for the lunch break. The sound came faintly at first, soft laughter, the rhythmic bounce of something hitting the ground like a rubber ball. One of the workers, Henry Voss, said he went to check, assuming maybe a family had stopped nearby. But when he stepped into the trees, he swore the sound shifted. The laughter seemed to move around him, circling, echoing from different directions, as if several children were darting just out of sight. Then the laughter stopped, replaced by a single, chilling sound, the squeak of a rusty swing. There were no swings in that forest. When he rejoined the others, pale and shaking, his foreman noticed frost climbing up the sides of his jacket zipper and along his gloves. Voss had only been gone a few minutes, but his skin was so cold to the touch they had to wrap him in blankets. He refused to talk about it after that. A few months later, hikers exploring a decommissioned part of the route discovered something stranger. Near the site of the 1947 bus wreck, buried in snow, they found a small tin lunchbox rusted through with age. Inside were a few artifacts sealed in time: a soggy arithmetic notebook, a small toy car, and a folded Christmas card with a child's handwriting. The card read, "To Miss Parker, thank you for making us sing. Merry Christmas from Tommy. Route 97 class." The handwriting was later matched, incredibly, to a record in the local historical archive. A child named Thomas Tommy Reed, age... There's a reason Deception Pass feels wrong at night. By day, it's breathtaking. A narrow channel of violent water between Whidbey and Fidalgo Island, where cold Pacific currents collide. Tourists take photos from the bridge's green steel span, watching the white-capped swirls below. But after sunset, the fog drifts in like a living thing, thick, slow, and silent, turning the entire landscape into something unreal. The bridge disappears into cloud, its structure humming faintly in the wind like a whispering voice. And that's when the locals say she walks. They call her the Woman of the Pass, a spectral figure in a tattered gray dress, always barefoot, always alone. Seen by fishermen, rangers, and tourists alike for nearly a century, her story has twisted through generations like the tides themselves. Some say she's a suicide victim, others say she's a warning, a remnant of the island's darker past. But if you ask the people who live there, they'll tell you one thing for certain: you don't stop your car on that bridge at night. The first recorded sighting dates back to March 1942, less than a year after the bridge opened to the public. A Navy officer named Lieutenant Harold Graves, stationed at Nass Whidbey, filed a police report claiming he'd nearly hit a woman walking down the middle of the span. It was raining heavily, visibility low. He saw her, long black hair soaked to the bone, clutching something in her hands. When he slammed on the brakes, she turned toward him, and then simply wasn't there. He searched with a flashlight but found nothing except a wet handprint smeared across his driver's window. 3 months later, another report came in, this time from a fisherman named Ray Dillard, who claimed to have seen a figure leap from the bridge just before dawn. Dillard called the Coast Guard, and they searched for hours. No body was ever found. Since then, nearly every decade has added another witness, another version of the same impossible story. The legend says she was once a woman named Margaret Maggie Olson, a widow from Coupeville whose husband drowned during a squall near the pass in 1923, years before the bridge was even built. She waited every night on the cliffs for him to return, lantern in hand, until one evening she walked into the fog and never came back. When construction of the bridge began in 1935, workers reportedly heard crying from beneath the scaffolding. Some claimed tools went missing only to reappear days later, neatly stacked at the center of the unfinished deck. One worker, Emmett Ross, fell to his death after swearing he saw a woman standing just beyond the safety rail, beckoning him closer. Even today, divers exploring the waters below sometimes report seeing strange shadows drifting beneath the currents, shapes too slow and too deliberate to be debris. In 1998, a tourist couple from California captured one of the most compelling pieces of evidence. On a foggy evening in late October, they were taking photos of the bridge lights from the lookout near Pass Island. When they developed the film weeks later, one frame showed a faint figure at the railing, a woman in gray, long hair whipping in the wind. But the chilling part? The angle from which the photo was taken made it impossible for anyone to be standing where she was. There was no ledge, no platform, just open air, 40 feet from the walkway. Rangers have their own stories. One of them, Paul Sutherland, a park warden in the early 2000s, shared his experience anonymously on a local forum before his retirement. He was patrolling the bridge around midnight in 2006, making sure no one was attempting to climb or jump. The fog was heavy, visibility less than 10 feet. He parked, stepped out, and heard it, faint sobbing, echoing through the steel trusses above. He called out, thinking maybe someone needed help. Then the sobbing stopped. Moments later, something brushed past him, cold, wet, the texture of soaked fabric. He spun around, but the fog was so dense he couldn't see his own boots. Then, through the mist, a woman's face appeared for a split second, pale, eyes hollow, lips moving soundlessly before she vanished. When Sutherland got back to his truck, there was seaweed on the driver's seat. Some nights, fishermen on the water below swear they hear a faint lullaby carried through the mist, a woman's voice singing to the waves. Others have seen her lantern swinging back and forth along the railings, glowing faintly yellow through the fog. One recent account from 2022 came from a cyclist, Tara Mills, who decided to cross the bridge just after 1 a.m. She was halfway across when her bike light flickered. Ahead of her, she saw someone standing still in the middle of the lane, a woman in gray, looking out over the railing. Tara stopped and called out, asking if she was okay. The woman turned. Her face was expressionless, not angry, not sad, just empty. And in that second, Tara noticed something impossible. The woman's dress was floating around her as though she were underwater. Before Tara could move, the woman stepped back and fell straight through the railing. Panicked, Tara dropped her bike and ran to look over. But there was no splash, no movement, just fog and black water below. Later, when she reviewed her GoPro footage, the moment played clearly. The woman turning, stepping back, and vanishing before her body would have hit the guardrail. The video has never been publicly released. Locals still talk about her, not out of superstition, but reverence. They say the bridge was named Deception for a reason. It hides things. It tricks the eye. Some nights it shows you what it wants to, and what it wants is to be remembered, whether she's Maggie Olson or someone else entirely. One thing is certain. Every few months, a driver calls the police claiming they've seen a woman walking along the bridge in the fog. And every time, the responding officers find nothing except a trail of wet footprints leading halfway across the bridge and stopping abruptly at the center. No footprints on the way back, just silence and the endless, whispering wind that seems to say, he never came home. For most people who drive across Deception Pass Bridge, it's just another part of the route. a fleeting marvel, a blur of steel and fog. But for locals, it's a place of respect and quiet fear. The stories don't end with Maggie Olson or even the early accidents. They say the bridge itself has become a beacon, something in its iron bones drawing in the lost. Since its completion in 1935, more than 50 people have fallen from the bridge into the swirling black water below, some intentionally, others not so much. And though the currents beneath are strong enough to swallow bodies whole, there's something about those who disappear here. They don't always stay gone. In 2011, a Coast Guard diver named Aaron Dwyer participated in a recovery mission after a reported jumper. He was experienced, having done over 100 dives in the Puget Sound. But what he saw beneath Deception Pass made him quit diving forever. When he descended into the green-black depths, visibility was near zero, just murk and motion. His dive light sliced through the water in short, trembling beams. At about 60 feet, he saw a shape, long hair drifting, fabric waving like seaweed. A woman's form, motionless, face turned upward. He reached out, prepared to retrieve her body. But as his gloved hand brushed the sleeve, her eyes opened. Aaron froze. The woman's gaze met his, pale, clouded, and her lips moved underwater, forming silent words that he swore he could read. "You came back," he screamed through his regulator, kicked toward the surface, and refused to dive again. Later, when they found him trembling on the boat deck, he said the air around him still smelled of salt and wet iron, the exact scent of the bridge's corroding beams. No body was ever recovered that day. In 2015, a car broke down right at the center of the bridge around 3 a.m. The driver, Eli Morgan, was heading home to Oak Harbor after visiting a friend. His engine suddenly sputtered. There's a tunnel carved into the mountains of Washington, old, damp, and endless, a relic of another time. It cuts straight through the Cascades, a mile and a half of pure blackness known as the Snoqualmie Tunnel, part of the Iron Horse Trail east of Seattle. By daylight, it's a favorite for hikers and cyclists, an engineering marvel from the early 1900s, cool even in summer, echoing with the sound of footsteps and dripping water. But at night, it changes. Locals say that when the sun dips behind the ridge, something inside the mountain wakes up. The temperature drops to freezing. Even in July, your breath fogs. And sometimes, just sometimes, you hear footsteps behind you that match your own perfectly, even when you stop. They call it the Phantom of Snoqualmie Tunnel. The tunnel was finished in 1914, part of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul and Pacific Railroad, known as the Milwaukee Road. Thousands of men blasted through solid rock to connect the western freight routes. But the work came at a cost. Historical records list 11 confirmed deaths during its construction. Cave-ins, gas leaks, dynamite failures. But locals whisper of more. Men who vanished into the dark during night shifts, whose bodies were never found. One foreman's journal, recovered decades later, mentions voices in the rock and tapping from sealed chambers, days before an explosion sealed part of the East Tunnel. Even after completion, the tunnel claimed lives. Engineers said the cold-trapped exhaust from passing locomotives, choking out workers before they could escape. There were reports of men found sitting upright beside the tracks, faces pale, eyes open, frozen in place. When the railway closed in 1980, the tunnel was abandoned to the mountain. But that's when the real stories began. In 1986, a pair of hikers named Paul and Denise Hartley attempted to cross the tunnel at dusk. They'd read online that it was perfectly safe with flashlights. Paul later described the air as too still, like being underwater. Their lights flickered halfway through, and Denise joked that it felt like the mountain didn't want them there. Then they heard it. At first, it sounded like footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing faintly behind them. But when they stopped walking, the sound stopped too. They tried again. Steps resumed, perfectly in sync. Paul spun around and shone his light into the black. Nothing. Just walls sweating moisture, a faint shimmer of mist. He shouted, "Who's there?" That's when something whispered back, clear as breath against his ear. "You shouldn't have come." They sprinted the rest of the way. When they reached the exit, Denise vomited from fear. Their flashlight batteries were completely drained. Though brand new, she refused to ever speak of it again. The legend of the phantom worker started after that. The story of a miner who died sealing a gas leak in 1913. His lamp extinguished, trapped alive behind the wall. People say he still patrols the tunnel, searching for a way out. Cyclists who've crossed alone report hearing a metallic clang echoing from nowhere, as if a pickaxe were striking stone. Others claim to smell coal smoke, though no trains have run through there in 40 years. One hiker, Kelly Simmons, shared her experience online in 2009. She entered the tunnel around 9 p.m. on a dare. Halfway through, she noticed something strange. Condensation forming on the walls in patterns. At first random, then forming letters, shaky, uneven. She took a photo. When enhanced later, the letters spelled one chilling phrase: "Bring a light." Her phone battery died moments later. She ran the rest of the tunnel in complete darkness, guided only by the faint glimmer at the far exit. When she reached the end, her shoes and jacket were soaked, as if she'd waded through water. But there was no puddle, no stream, nothing. In 2017, a paranormal investigator group from Portland set up night cameras in the tunnel for a 48-hour study. They left recorders running from both entrances. Around 2:37 a.m., one camera picked up motion in the center of the tunnel, a faint silhouette walking toward the lens. The temperature reading dropped from 48 degrees to 29 degrees in under 10 seconds. When the figure came closer, it seemed to flicker, like a projection stuttering between frames. Then, just before the camera battery cut, a hand pressed against the lens, dirty, calloused, leaving behind a wet print. When the footage was recovered, the moisture from that print was still visible on the equipment. It smelled faintly of diesel and smoke. A ranger named Mark Ellison, who patrols the Iron Horse Trail, told a story he rarely repeats. He was doing maintenance one morning in 2020, patching lighting at the east entrance. The power had been off overnight. As he walked into the tunnel with his flashlight, he saw a condensation breath, not his. He called out, expecting maybe a camper or vandal. But what answered wasn't human. From deep inside the tunnel came a rhythmic sound. Tap, 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 like a wrench hitting steel in threes. Then a second sound joined it, echoing softly between the walls. A low humming, a man's voice, faintly singing an old working song. Mark's flashlight began to dim. He turned around, intending to leave, but standing just 20 feet away was a figure in old miner's clothes, soaked and blackened with soot, holding a metal lantern that burned with blue fire. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly the man raised his hand and pointed to the ground. Mark shone his light there, a small engraved plate half buried in gravel. It read, 1913, last to leave. When Mark looked up, the figure was gone. Today, hikers still cross the Snoqualmie Tunnel, laughing, taking photos, enjoying the echo. But the regulars know the rules. Never enter without light. Never stop halfway. And if you hear footsteps behind you that don't belong to anyone in your group, keep walking. Don't turn around, because some say the phantom isn't trying to scare you. He's trying to follow you out, to find the light he lost over a century ago. And if you do look back, they say you'll see a glimmer deep in the tunnel, like a single miner's lamp burning bright blue in the black, a light that was never supposed to go out. If you've ever been deep inside a tunnel, you know the feeling, the way sound behaves differently, how footsteps seem to come from everywhere at once. Now imagine that sound stretching for over 2.3 miles with no light, no sound of wind, just the steady drip. Drip, drip of mineral water seeping from ancient stone. That's the Snoqualmie Tunnel, built through the heart of the Cascades in 1914. It was a marvel of its time, a gateway for freight trains cutting through the mountain spine of Washington. But to the men who built it, it was something else entirely. A tomb, the construction, 1911, 1914. Newspapers back then called it the Great Bore of the West. Crews blasted through solid granite, day and night, often by candlelight. The workers were a mix of immigrants, Italians, Chinese, Irish, each group assigned to different sections of the tunnel. They worked in brutal conditions, freezing air, constant dampness, and the ever-present smell of blasting powder. One foreman, George Leland, wrote in his diary, "The walls whisper when the drills stop." Highway 2 cuts a crooked scar through the Cascade Mountains, stretching from Everett on the coast to Spokane in the east. It's a breathtaking drive by day. Dense evergreens crowding the roadside, misty rivers flashing through the gaps, peaks rising like silent sentinels above the clouds. But when night falls, something changes. The forest seems to lean closer. The fog thickens in ways it shouldn't. Locals have a name for this stretch between Index and Stevens Pass: the Highway of Lost Souls. It's not just a nickname. It's a reputation carved from over a century of tragedy, vanishing motorists, and sightings of figures that disappear when you blink. The avalanche of 1910 began with snow, 30 feet of it, falling endlessly over the mountains. On March 1st, 1910, 2 passenger trains were trapped near Stevens Pass, stranded by the blizzard. For days they sat there, the passengers freezing, waiting for the weather to break. Then, in the dead of night, the mountain moved. A wall of snow, ice and stone broke loose, thundering down the slope and swallowing both trains whole. 96 people died, passengers, crew, and townsfolk from the tiny community of Wellington. It remains the deadliest avalanche in U.S. history. The town was later abandoned, renamed Ty, then erased from maps. But the ghosts, they say, never left. Residents of nearby Skycomish tell of nights when the wind howls just right, carrying with it the unmistakable scream of metal on tracks. Though no train has passed that route in over half a century, campers report the ground trembling beneath them as if something massive is sliding just beneath the earth. And sometimes, in the snow near the old railway site, travelers find footprints, bare, human, and leading nowhere. The woman in the white coat. The earliest modern reports date back to the late 1960s. A highway patrol officer, Sergeant Ron Michaels, was driving a routine night shift when he spotted a woman walking along the shoulder near Stevens Pass. She wore a long white coat and carried a suitcase. Thinking she'd been in an accident, Michaels pulled over and stepped out. The air was cold, his breath fogging in his flashlight beam. The woman stopped walking. She turned, her face pale, her eyes empty, and whispered, "Do you know where the train is?" Before Michaels could respond, the woman stepped backward into the darkness. When he shone the light again, she was gone. No footprints, no trace. He never filed the report officially. But he told his colleagues, who later began calling her the passenger. To this day, truckers driving that stretch after midnight still report seeing her by the roadside. A woman in white, holding a case, her hair frozen by rain. One driver in 1999 swore he saw her step right into the path of his rig. He slammed on the brakes, but there was nothing. No impact, no body, just a smell, ozone and old metal like a storm breaking over rusted tracks. The disappearing cars, it isn't just ghosts people see on Highway 2. Sometimes, entire vehicles vanish. In 1988, State Patrol received a call from a motorist who'd witnessed a sedan ahead of him swerve sharply on a curve near Deception Falls, then disappear. He assumed it had crashed down the embankment, but when rescue teams arrived, there was no sign of impact. No skid marks, no debris. What they found instead was unsettling: the imprint of tires in the gravel leading straight toward the cliff's edge, and stopping abruptly, as though the car had driven straight into the air. Locals began to whisper about the turn that eats. A few years later, in 1994, a nearly identical report came in. Same location, same conditions. The driver who made the call, Marianne Cobb, said she saw a car disappear right before her eyes. It was there, taillights glowing red through the fog. Then it blinked out, just gone. Like someone had turned off reality for a second. The ghost patrolman in the early 2000s. A new legend began circulating among truckers: the Phantom Cop. Several drivers claimed they'd been pulled over late at night by a lone state trooper, tall, clean-shaven, wearing an outdated uniform with the name tag D. Hawkins. He would ask routine questions, hand them a written warning, and wave them off. But when those drivers later called the Washington State Patrol to confirm the officer's identity, they were told no such trooper existed. One driver, Chuck Renshaw, still keeps that warning slip in a drawer. The paper's yellowed and smells faintly of mildew, but the handwriting is crisp. Dated February 12, 1953, Chuck swears he met a ghost, and strangely enough, a search through old archives confirms it. Trooper Daniel Hawkins died in a car accident that very night, on the same highway, just 2 miles from where he'd stopped Chuck 50 years later. The vanishing town of Ty, the original Wellington site, renamed Ty after the avalanche, was slowly reclaimed by forest. But hikers who visit the ruins speak of strange noises, hammering, voices calling, and sometimes faint lights deep in the trees. One paranormal team recorded EVPs near the old railway yard. Among the static, a male voice whispered, "Train's late." "They're waiting." When they returned a week later, they found fresh footprints near the ruins, men's boots, half melted into the snow. But no one had been there. A hiker, Ella Navarro, who camped near that same site in 2015, described waking in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing outside her tent, slow and deep. She thought it was a bear. When she shone her light, she saw the outline of a man's head through the tent fabric, a cap shadowing his face. She screamed, grabbed her phone, and when she looked again, the shadow was gone. But her tent zipper was open. In her audio recording, later recovered from the phone, just before her scream, a faint male voice can be heard whispering, "Ticket." Please, the 2021 disappearance in October 2021. 2 college students from Wenatchee, Tyler Jenkins and Matt Rourke, disappeared while driving home from Seattle on Highway 2. Security cameras at a gas station in Sultan showed them leaving around 10:48 p.m. Their phones pinged one last time near Deception Falls at 11:23 p.m., then nothing. A week later, search teams found their car idling at the roadside, doors locked, headlights on. The inside was dry, but the exterior was soaked, as if it had been through a storm. There were no footprints around it. No sign of the 2 men. Their dashcam footage was retrieved. It recorded 47 minutes of normal driving, then static. Just before it cut out, a faint voice can be heard under the noise whispering, "Do you know where the train is?" The same words spoken by the woman in white, half a century earlier. The footage ends with the sound of something slamming against metal, and then faintly the screech of a train that shouldn't exist. The curse of the past historians claim the land itself is cursed not by spirits, but by what it's buried under. The avalanche of 1910 didn't just kill people, it buried the railway, trapping tons of iron, steel, and debris. When the highway was built decades later, it cut right across that grave. Locals say the ghosts are still tied to the wreckage, their energy bleeding through the mountain, replaying the same tragedy over and over again, each time pulling more souls into the loop. Travelers who dare to stop along that stretch sometimes report seeing faint light beams cutting through fog, like lanterns or train headlights far off the road. They swear they can hear muffled cries. There's a road on the far western edge of Washington that feels like the end of the world. Highway 112, the Strait of Juan de Fuca Scenic Byway, winds along the cliffs of the Olympic Peninsula. A narrow ribbon of asphalt pressed between the Black Forest and the endless gray sea. During the day, it's a place of wild beauty, eagles circling, waves exploding against jagged stones, mist curling around the evergreens. But when night falls and fog rolls in from the Pacific, it becomes something else entirely. Locals call it the Road of Shadows. And the stories that come from it don't sound like ordinary ghost tales. They sound like something older. Something that's been here long before the highway, long before the towns, long before the first maps were drawn. The logging camps of 1912, the first settlers to build near Highway 112 were loggers, rough men who worked the dense rainforests, cutting ancient cedar and hemlock for the mills in Port Angeles. But in 1912, the Forks Logging Company abruptly shut down one of its camps near Pillar Point. Officially, it was due to structural instability in the soil. Unofficially, the surviving workers told a different story. They said the forest was alive. Workers reported waking at night to see figures standing at the tree line, tall black silhouettes with no faces. Not animals, not people, just shadows shaped like men. The men claimed those shapes would follow them, always at a distance, silent, but visible even when no moonlight should have made them visible at all. One logger, Elliot Marks, vanished without a sound while returning from the worksite one evening. They found his boots in the mud, and his footprints just stopped, as though he'd stepped into the air and never come down. When his co-workers followed the trail, they found handprints in the dirt, not human ones. Too long, too thin, and pressed deep as if burned into the earth. The camp shut down the next week. The Missing Fisherman, 1953. In the 1950s, Local papers reported the mysterious disappearance of 3 fishermen who'd launched their boat near Clallam Bay. Their vessel washed ashore 2 days later, intact but empty. Nets still coiled, engine off, food untouched. The strangest detail came from the Coast Guard who found the boat. The deck was covered in black, soot-like residue, as though someone had burned a lantern too close. But there was no smell of smoke, just cold, damp ash. 2 weeks later, a driver named Samuel O'Donnell reported seeing 3 shadowy shapes standing on the shoulder of Highway 112 near the water, unmoving despite the heavy rain. He thought they were people in dark coats, until his headlights passed over them, and the beams didn't reflect. The figures just stayed black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. He said one of them turned its head toward him as he passed. He didn't look again. The tribal warning. The Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, whose land stretches across parts of the Olympic Peninsula, have their own explanation for the beings that haunt that stretch of highway. They speak of the Black Watchers, spirits said to guard the boundary between the living and the dead. According to tribal elders, those who wander near the cliffs at night risk drawing their attention. The Watchers don't speak, don't chase, they simply appear, and once they've seen you, you belong to them. They don't take you immediately. Sometimes it takes days. You might see them in your reflection, standing behind you in a window, or in the corner of a room when the lights flicker. Then, one night, you'll hear a knock at your door. 3 times, slow and deliberate, and when you open it, you'll be gone. No scream, no struggle, just gone. That's the old belief, but what's strange is how often the modern disappearances echo the same pattern. The park ranger's testimony, 1987. In 1987, Ranger David Latimer of Olympic National Park filed an unofficial incident report. He'd been patrolling near the Salt Creek Recreation Area when his truck headlights caught something on the road. At first, he thought it was a group of hikers, 3 figures walking single file down the center line. But when he honked the horn, they didn't move. They just stood there facing away. Latimer stopped and stepped out with his flashlight. The beam hit the road, but not the figures, as if the light bent around them. He called out, "Park Services, are you hurt?" Nothing. Then one of them turned its head. He saw the shape of a face, not flat but hollow, like the outline of a skull made of shadow. No eyes, no mouth, just void. Latimer ran back to his truck. His radio was dead, the engine wouldn't start, and the temperature inside dropped so fast his breath fogged the glass. When he finally got the engine to catch, the figures were gone. But for weeks after, his house lights would flicker at 2:47 a.m., the exact time he'd seen them on the highway. He resigned that summer. The sound recordings, 2014. In 2014, a paranormal research team from Seattle set up audio recorders along Highway 112 after multiple reports of moving shadows near Twin Beach Road. The recordings ran overnight. At 3:12 a.m., one mic captured something that sent shivers through every listener. A low, pulsing sound like wind moving through a hollow log. But beneath it, a voice whispered, "Turn off the light." Another whispered, seconds later, "We remember you." When they checked the camera footage, there was nothing, just fog and darkness. But in 2 frames, a tall shape can be seen reflected faintly in the lens, darker than the black sky behind it. One of the researchers, Allison Grant, went missing 3 days later after returning alone to retrieve additional sensors. Her car was found on the shoulder near Crescent Beach, door open, engine running. The driver's seat was empty, but there were handprints of soot across the hood, 5 long smears that led toward the forest. The couple on the cliff, 2020. In the early months of 2020, a young couple, Nate and Jordan Wallace, were camping near the cliffs of Sekiu Point when they decided to take a late-night drive. Dashcam footage recovered from their SUV tells a chilling story. At 1:14 a.m., the car slows near a blind curve. Fog rolls across the lens, thick, gray, almost alive. Then, in the distance, 3 human shapes appear in the beam of the headlights, standing motionless on the yellow line. Nate slows. Jordan can be heard whispering, "Don't stop, just go." As they pass, one of the figures turns its head. For a split second, it's visible in the camera light, featureless, blacker than the night itself. Then the footage cuts to static. When the search party found their car, it was parked at the edge of a turnout overlooking the ocean. Doors locked. Engine off. No sign of struggle. Inside, the only thing found on the passenger seat was a smear of black ash. and Nate's phone recording one last message. A whisper, barely audible. They followed us home. The road that sees you back. Even now, Highway 112 remains open, a winding, lonely route where the ocean wind hums through broken pines and the fog can swallow you whole. Travelers still report headlights dimming for no reason, engines cutting out, radios humming with a low frequency that sounds almost like breathing. Some say the shadows are still there, waiting, patient as stone, for someone to make the mistake of stopping, of looking too long into the dark between the trees. Truckers have a rule now: never drive that road between midnight and 4 a.m. If you do and you see movement in your mirrors, keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't blink, because whatever walks beside you on Highway 112 isn't trying to cross the road. It's crossing into you. If you stand on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge at night, long after traffic has died down and the only light is the rhythmic blink of red beacons in the fog, you can sometimes feel it. A vibration beneath your feet, a ghostly echo of motion that shouldn't exist. The locals call it Galloping Gertie's Revenge. To understand this haunting, you need to know what came before. In November 1940, the original Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed just 4 months after its opening. The bridge was a marvel of engineering, elegant, slender, one of the longest suspension bridges in the world at the time. But engineers didn't yet understand aeroelastic flutter, the deadly resonance between wind and steel that would make the structure twist, buckle, and finally snap. The collapse was captured on film, showing the bridge writhing like a living thing before it plunged into Puget Sound below. The only life lost that day was a Cocker Spaniel named Tubby, trapped in a car as the bridge fell away. But as the years passed, people began whispering that something else died that day, something unseen that refused to stay buried beneath the waves. By the 1950s, long before the new bridge was constructed, fishermen along the Narrows began reporting strange things. They said they could hear metal groaning beneath the water, like chains dragging across the seafloor. Divers claimed to feel vibrations even in calm seas, a pulse that throbbed through their equipment and rattled their bones. Some spoke of hearing faint screams over their radios, snippets of voices drowned by static. "Help me! Trapped!" followed by silence. One diver, Captain Lawrence Price, wrote in his 1957 dive log, descending near the wreck site, "Water calm, no current. At 80 feet, I heard what sounded like cables snapping above me. Impossible given the depth. Checked gauges, fine. Then I saw a movement in the silt, a flicker of something pale, human-shaped, drifting with the tide. Eyes open, mouth wide as if calling out. When I reached for my flashlight, it was gone." He refused to dive there again. The old Cascade Highway, winding through the thick evergreen forests of Washington State, is one of those roads that feels timeless, ancient, almost sentient. Before the modern U.S. Route 2 cut through the region, this twisting, narrow ribbon of asphalt carried travelers through shadowy mountain passes, past waterfalls that gleam like liquid glass and cliffs that drop hundreds of feet into fog. It's beautiful by day, serene, postcard perfect. But when night falls, the same highway transforms into something altogether different. They say that on certain moonless nights, you can see them, the phantom headlights drifting along the curves, bright and real at first, until they rise above the tree line and vanish into thin air. No one knows exactly when the stories began. Some blame the avalanche of 1939, when a blizzard swept through the Stevens Pass area, burying a bus and 3 cars under tons of ice. 18 people were lost, never recovered from the mountain's frozen grip. Others point further back to the early 1900s, when the road was carved out by logging companies and countless workers died in accidents, crushed under fallen timber, swept into ravines, or lost forever to the river. Whatever the origin, the locals will tell you one thing with certainty: this road remembers. In 1962, a retired logger named Thomas "Red" McGuire was driving home to Skycomish late one December night. Snow was falling in thick, quiet sheets, and the forest was a wall of blackness on either side. He'd taken the old Cascade route out of habit. Fewer cars, fewer cops, and a straight shot home. But halfway through a narrow curve near the Deception Falls overlook, Red saw something ahead, a pair of bright headlights rounding the bend toward him. Fast. Too fast for the icy road. He slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on the frozen pavement. But instead of colliding, the oncoming lights lifted off the ground, rising above the trees, arcing into the night sky, and disappearing completely. Red sat there shaking, his engine idling, steam curling from his hood. He told the police later that it looked like a car drove straight into the air. They found no tire tracks but his own. Over the decades, the phantom lights have been reported dozens of times. Truckers describe them pacing alongside their rigs through the fog, bright beams flickering in their mirrors, keeping perfect speed before fading into darkness. Hikers claim to see them weaving through the trees where no road exists, and more than one motorist has followed the lights, believing them to be another car, only to find themselves at a dead end, staring into a cliffside, with no sign of another vehicle anywhere. In 1997, a local high school teacher named Elaine Purvis vanished while driving home from a weekend retreat in Leavenworth. Her last phone call, made at 9:42 p.m., was to her husband. She said she'd gotten turned around on an old part of the highway and was trying to follow another car's taillights to find her way back. That was the last anyone heard from her. Her vehicle was found 3 days later, deep in a ravine off a section of the old Cascade Highway that had been closed since the 1950s. No tire marks led to the edge, as though the car had simply driven off into thin air. The passenger door was open. Inside, police found her purse, her coat, and her cell phone battery dead. The final photo in her camera roll, time-stamped at 9:46 p.m., showed two bright orbs reflected in the windshield, hovering ahead of her car. Her body was never found. Local rangers avoid the road after dark. They say the air gets too quiet. Even the crickets go silent, as though the forest itself is holding its breath. Travelers who've dared to stop describe hearing whispers, a faint, layered murmur, as if a dozen voices were talking all at once from somewhere deep in the trees. One hiker, camping near an old bridge along the route, woke to find footprints around his tent in the snow, bare human footprints leading away from the road toward the woods. He followed them the next morning. They ended abruptly at a patch of frozen river. No body, no drag marks, just the faint shimmer of light beneath the ice, pulsing like a heartbeat before it faded. The Washington Department of Transportation has long since blocked off most of the old Cascade Highway, citing safety hazards and erosion. But curious souls still find their way in. YouTubers, paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous lights. Some succeed, capturing glowing spheres hovering just above the tree line. Others return claiming that their electronics failed, their batteries drained, their cameras corrupted. One man swore he heard someone whisper directly into his ear, "Keep following the lights." He left that night and never returned to the mountains. As for what the lights are, no one can say. Skeptics call them ball lightning or reflected headlights from the modern highway, but locals know better. They say the spirits of the lost, those buried by avalanches, drowned in the river, or vanished into the ravines, still wander the old road, headlights forever searching for the way home. And if you ever find yourself driving near Stevens Pass on a misty winter night, and you see a pair of lights glimmering just ahead of you, ask yourself one question before following. Are you sure they belong to a car? The old Cascade Highway lies buried in the shadows of Washington's vast mountain wilderness, an ancient artery carved through rock, forest, and fog long before the highways we know today existed. Twisting between jagged cliffs and dense cedar groves, it's a forgotten path, overgrown, half devoured by nature, and haunted by something much older than asphalt and steel. When you drive there at night, your headlights barely seem to cut through the dark. The trees lean inward like sentinels, and the mist moves as if it breathes. Even before the first ghost stories, locals used to say the mountain watches travelers who dare to take the old road. But it's not just superstition. Something about this stretch of forgotten highway carries a strange energy, one that's drawn countless stories of lights, voices, and disappearances for nearly a century. The avalanche of 1939, the first documented tragedy, occurred in 1939, deep winter. A violent snowstorm slammed into the Cascades, covering the region in whiteout blizzard conditions. At approximately 11:27 p.m., a Greyhound bus carrying 19 passengers vanished between Skycomish and Stevens Pass. The driver's last radio transmission was brief and unsettling. Visibility 0, following headlights ahead. Can't tell if it's real. The bus never reached its destination. Search crews later found fragments of the guardrail ripped away and the faint outline of tire tracks ending abruptly at a steep drop. What was strange, though, was that the tracks didn't show any sign of braking, as if the driver hadn't even tried to stop. The bus was never recovered. Every spring thaw since, pieces of glass and twisted chrome sometimes surface in the river far below. From that year on, travelers began reporting phantom lights on the road, twin beams that appear out of nowhere, drifting along the mountainside, moving too smoothly, too silently, to belong to a human driver. The logger's account, 1962. The most famous encounter came from Thomas "Red" McGuire, a retired logger. It was December of 1962, a night wrapped in falling snow and silence. Red had worked the mountains for 30 years and knew every bend by heart. He was heading home in his pickup after visiting an old friend in Index, taking the old Cascade route because he preferred solitude to the crowded new highway. He said it started just past the Deception Falls overlook. Ahead of him, two bright headlights appeared in the darkness, moving steadily toward him, far too close for comfort. He flicked his high beams, honked, expecting the other driver to swerve or slow down, but instead the lights lifted upward, not like a bump or hill. They rose, smooth as an elevator, up through the fog, and hovered above the tree line before fading out completely. Red was a hard man, not prone to stories or fear. But when state troopers arrived after his frantic call, they found him trembling, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "The damn car flew," he said over and over. "I swear to God it flew. No tracks were found, no debris." No other witnesses. The vanishing teacher, 1997, nearly 4 decades later, the road claimed another. Her name was Elaine Purvis, a 34-year-old teacher from Everett. She was returning from a weekend retreat with colleagues in Leavenworth when she went missing. Her husband received one final call. Elaine said she'd taken a wrong turn, ending up on an old part of the road she didn't recognize. She mentioned seeing another car ahead, saying she'd follow its taillights until she found a main junction. The call ended at 9:42 p.m. 3 days later, her Subaru was found down a ravine, deep beneath a section of highway that had been closed for over 40 years. The passenger door hung open. The car's headlights were still on, faint from a dying battery. But there were no skid marks, no signs of impact. It was as if the car had been placed there. Inside, officers found Elaine's cell phone, dead from cold, and her camera. The last image, time-stamped just 4 minutes after her final call, showed 2 orbs of light ahead of her windshield, glowing against the blackness. When investigators enhanced the photo, they noticed faint outlines behind the lights, a suggestion of a bus windshield and rows of seats hanging in midair. Her body was never found. The silent forest hikers who stray too close to the old highway at night